Welcome to the Behavioral Science Podcast, where we explore the science behind human behavior influence. Today, we are absolutely honored to host Dr. Michael Platt, Director of Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Platt's work bridges neuroscience, psychology, marketing, and branding, helping us understand decision making, leadership, and team dynamics. He's also the co founder of Cogwear, a venture at the intersection of neuroscience and wearable technology, and the author of The Leader's Brain, a compelling guide to enhancing leadership and innovation through neuroscience. Dr. Platt, it's an absolute privilege to have you with us. Thanks for coming, Dr. Platt. I'm so excited for the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. Really excited to finally have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Platt. Just to start, I just want to ask that how come that you are into the field of neuroscience? What makes you to be part of neuroscience, and that you have had this incredible journey in the field of neuroscience? Just tell us about something about yourself and your background and of this journey. I'm excited to know, Dr. Platt.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of an unusual journey for a neuroscientist. I actually started out my career as an anthropologist. Uh, as an undergraduate student, I was supposed to do something practical. I mean, my parents didn't go to college, so my dad was a mechanic, my mom drove a school bus, and the intention was, well, become a doctor or an engineer or something like that.
Mhm.
But I took some anthropology classes, and I really just was enamored. I mean, it was just so deeply energizing for me because it's really the study of human nature, right? It's a study of what makes us tick as people, what makes us tick a little bit similarly or differently from other animals, what makes some people tick one way and others another way, and how might that affect our lives and the way we work. And after I liked it so much, I got a PhD in anthropology as well here at the University of Pennsylvania. But by the time that I was finishing up, and I was actually doing work that was more at the intersection of psychology and biology, I realized if I wanted to understand human nature, I needed to understand the brain. And so I did a postdoctoral fellowship after that at NYU in neuroscience, which was essentially a second PhD in neuroscience. And so I had to do some kind of boring work to learn the techniques and technologies in analytics so that I would be armed to be able to address some of the bigger questions that I was interested in. So that was an exercise in delayed gratification. I got one job offer at Duke University. I was really grateful for that in the medical school there. So I taught medical students for the first time, and that awakened me to the clinical side of things, basically, kind of what are the issues surrounding brain health and mental health, and that has come to occupy more and more of the work that I've done. So I do a lot of here at Penn, I have a big basic science laboratory, and also the innovation shop at Wharton. But this kind of flavor, this concern for brain health, has continued to influence my work. And I was at Duke for 15 years, uh, founded the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies with my good friend Scott Hutel, ran the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience, and ultimately the Institute for Brain Sciences. And that really prepared me for coming here to Penn because of the Institute. I had two charges there, really. One was connect all the neuroscientists to each other because they were in different schools, create a community, but also connect to all the other disciplines, law, business, art, humanities. So we were reaching outward, and you have to learn to speak the language of, it's like going to a different culture. I learned very much from the early anthropologists, and that really put me on a course that resulted in me coming here to Penn and to Wharton, where through Wharton, which is top flight business school, obviously, we have this opportunity to create a signal and to say, hey, brain science should be a major part of the future of business research, business education, business application.
Yes, that's quite a journey, Dr. Platt. That's really fascinating to sort of listen your journey right from the your student days and to hear that you are director of Wharton Neuroscience Initiative. So and besides that you have written a book on the leader's brain. So that's absolutely commendable and immense. So just to set the podcast show, so we have divided it into three parts majorly. So the first part will be talking about the curious minds about the everyday life. The people that they are not very technical savvy, they are not part of the business, but they are sort of everyday people, like right from the waking up and just to heading to their job and just doing their own work and things, and this is coming back to home and things. And second is for business and leadership, of course. Then we'll talking about the business and leadership, how businesses can leverage the neuroscience, and how we can sort of we'll talk more on that. And at last we'll talk about the luxury and branding, to be in specific, how what sort of in luxury and branding, what neuroscience gets invoked, because these are the different principles altogether. So yeah, just to start with, these days, we are all so in this multitasking world, and we all are there in our mobiles and getting constant notifications and things. So I'm really intrigued to understand the brain's wiring in terms of these days for everyday life, for curious minds, how our brain work, and for just for well-being and better productivity, what we can take from the neuroscience, Dr. Platt.
Well, that's a huge topic, and there are many
Yeah,
different
absolutely.
kind of paths we take on that. But I think if I would frame this conversation in the following way, which is that
Hmm.
our brains were not designed for this environment. Our brains were designed for an environment that was about 200,000 years ago,
Okay.
and maybe even older than that. So our brains are not computers. They're not very much like computer. I mean, there's some aspects that are, but more like Swiss Army knives. So we have in our heads basically a set of different tools. Like think about a Swiss Army knife. You have a knife, you have a corkscrew, a screwdriver, you have a pliers, and that's the way our brains are kind of set up. And those tools are actually shared with some of our non-human primate cousins, monkeys and apes, etc. And so some of those tools, a lot of the tools in our heads really are very ancient. They're probably evolved 28, 30 million years ago, maybe even longer ago than that. I mean, the tools in our head are maybe a little bit sharper, a little bit bigger than you'd find in a monkey, but it really reflects this deep biological heritage. So why do I bring that up? Well, those tools evolved to solve very specific purposes, like social engagement and connection, for example, or decision making, or various aspects of learning, or innovation and thinking outside the box, exploration. And the way we're carrying those around in our heads right now, and we're trying to apply them in an environment that's not like the one that our brains evolved in. That environment was one in which things moved pretty slowly, right?
Hmm.
Things changed on a not very fast pace, where people lived in very small groups, somewhere between probably 20 and 100, no more than 100 people probably, where they had face-to-face contact with each other on a daily basis, right? And where there was a relatively high level of equality, if not completely egalitarian, and people were physically active. And when they weren't actively sort of producing for the group, they were probably engaged in various kinds of social bonding activities like music and art, things that we believe evolved to kind of help us connect with each other, right, and to express ourselves. And there's probably a significant amount of play. So now think about where we are in the current world, especially in modern societies where we are working all day long. We're hyper connected to millions
Yes.
of people, right?
What's it?
With no breaks. We're
Yeah.
sitting on our butts all day long, right? We're not physically
Yes.
active. There's a high
Yes.
degree of inequality, right?
Hmm.
And we're not very active. So the conditions for which our brains are really designed, and our bodies too, are not being met. And I think that that is a major source. I'm not the first to say this, a major source of a lot of the unhappiness that we all, that many of us experience. And that is a driver ultimately of things like, brain health disorders, of cardiovascular disorders, of the kinds of things that are, we consider kind of under the umbrella of lifestyle problems. It's really just the challenges of trying to match this old Swiss Army knife, to a new environment, right? That's so very, very different from the one that it's supposed to support. Why is that important? Well, I think when you recognize that, right, you recognize the rules the brain lives by in some sense, at least you can kind of optimize around those rules. Right? So there are things that once you just accept that, you can say, okay, well, I need to do things like uh, be active, for example, take breaks. Our brains are not meant to be on all day long. That's why we experience things like Zoom fatigue, right? Where you need to actually actively take a break because of the attentional demands of interacting and working online. We need to kind of, in some ways, limit our options, because the more options you have, unlike what economists have been telling us for a long time, the more options you have, the more difficult it is to actually process the information, the more challenging we find it to make a decision, and we often regret that decision. And that kind of that limitation, that tyranny of choice, we now understand is a result of the ways that our brains evolved to be very efficient, right? And our brains are don't encode everything in the world because there are just energetic demands, energetic physiological limitations. So our brains are only encoding what's new, what stands out, okay, what's different from the past. That's what's informative and we should pay attention to. So much else is thrown out, right? And that makes it turns out really hard when you encounter, like, you walk into a big box store or you go on a website where there's thousands of options. It actually makes it really hard to choose, right? And to make a really good decision. So these are just a few examples. But, I think that my own work is really, especially in the last decade and a half, focused on social functions, and in particular social connection. And we are all becoming really, really aware of the impacts of not having those kinds of connections, of not having social support, of being isolated. We know that being isolated, being lonely, is worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, being an alcoholic, and on and on and on. And yet our environment seems, it is designed to make us more isolated. So we spend all of our time on screens, right? And all of our time, and all that time, we may be on social media sites, but it's not the same as being in the real world with real living three-dimensional people, the kinds of stimuli, right, that our brains evolved to support, right? And I think that so we have a number of headwinds that we're facing as individuals and as societies that are getting in the way of the health and high function of our brains. And technology is just one of those. Inequalities and other environmental, contamination, environmental challenges, physical environment, that's another one too. So we need to get back to basic principles in terms of rethinking how we do things.
Yes, I mean your last line that really hit me. I mean, we need to have very basic things. What our brain is designed for, and also, I mean, you said it that our brain is designed for, I think, 200,000 years ago. So I just want to have a follow up question on that, Dr. Platt. That so we are living in today's society. We are living in majorly capitalistic society. So so that capitalism is not suitable because back in 200,000 years ago capitalism wasn't there. So my two questions. So we were more intelligent than what we are today, so our brain was more intelligent during those days 200,000 years ago, or we are intelligent enough today? I mean, if you compare, because you come from anthropology background as well, so I'm really interested to know that.
Well, I don't think that we can, well, we can't really compare, but I think that our brains have not changed appreciably, in any way that we can measure during
Is
that
it?
time.
Okay.
Okay, so they're the same basic size, they function in the same way. And really, there hasn't been enough time for evolution to shape our brains in response to changes in technology. People only learned to read and write, developed writing 5,000 years ago at the earliest. Most people didn't become literate until the last 50 years or so, across the world. So that's not enough time. So our brains have this enormous capacity to learn and to adapt and to be very flexible, right? So we are adapting as we can, and we do incorporate technology, we do incorporate tools into our schema, but it's just the nature of the environment that we're in that we find particularly challenging. Like for example, there may be limitations on the number of close contacts that you can actually maintain, in your memory, in your own ability to process. That's been an argument that's been around for a couple of decades, which makes it, just sort of challenging. So I don't want to say that people are. I have heard this notion actually. A colleague of mine back at Duke had this sort of idea that people are getting dumber over time. I don't think that's really true, and I don't think that's really defensible. Um, we're just as smart, but we're not capitalizing on our strengths, I guess would be how I put it. So, technology gives us the ability to do more with less. We can offload memory to other devices, right? You can look things up. You can ask ChatGPT for the answer. You can Google things. You can use Google Maps or Waze to navigate instead of learning how to use a map, right? And so that frees your brain up to do other things potentially. But what are you using that time and energy for, right? And unfortunately, it seems that people are using it often in ways that are probably self-destructive, right? So in engaging with social media or with other kinds of media that promote poor mental health, right? That lead to deteriorating mental health. Uh,
Mhm.
but it's addictive, right? And so it makes it very difficult to get out of that doom loop, to get out of that spiral, right? And so I don't want to say that people are that our IQ or intelligence has lowered, but rather as we lean into and become immersed in these more technological environments that are not real world physical and social environments, it seems to be a detriment to our health and our well-being and our performance.
Okay. Before moving on to the business and leadership section, Dr. Platt, just want to have another question on, because we are human beings and we take decisions emotionally, knowingly, unknowingly. 95% of the decisions are being taken by our subconscious mind. Typically by and large, in this behavioral science industry. So we sort of consider that. So I just want to understand for our everyday life, for example, emotions like anchoring, framing, priming, how does these impacts the everyday life of humans, and what we can take out from that? If you can just explain that, to us.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real these are really important questions that have and that this knowledge has surfaced from behavioral science, from behavioral economics, and from
Yes.
psychology, and
Yes.
increasingly from neuroscience. I mean, the first thing I want to point out is that emotions aren't a bad thing. I mean, emotions are there for a very important reason, which is that they help to add motivational tone to the decisions that you're making, to the information that you're storing in memory, to the way that your attention is allocated, which alters what you actually even perceive in the world, right? So those are really important things. I think what happens though is when we take that emotional coloring system, right? That evolved again for times, ages past, and then try to apply that in the kinds of worlds where we are now, it doesn't always work right. Right? So
Mhm.
that's where potentially things like framing, things like, for example, kind of biases like loss aversion and endowment effects uh,
Yes.
emerge and can actually frustrate decision making. So you might, in the case of loss aversion, uh, not take a risk, a really good risk, because your vigilance system is too tuned to the bad things that could happen rather than the potential windfalls that could happen. That's very common in people, right? And we've shown in some of our own work that that begins with the process of attention, right? Because if your vigilance, your warning system is on high alert, this is especially true for people who are anxious, for example, who have negative affect, then they attend more to the bad things that could happen rather than the good things, and so they're less likely to to make a decision that has some chance of good and bad things happening. That gets in the way of good financial decisions, especially in older people. It gets in the way of good healthcare decisions, in terms of patients um, overweighting potential risks of a life-saving treatment, right? Because it's probabilistic. This manifests in trading decisions where you have to negotiate with somebody, where there's a buyer and a seller, right? And I know we're treading into the business side of things, but we've shown that early warning system, that vigilance system, interferes with that process as well. So it's a your warning light goes on because you might have to give up something, like to sell my mug to you. Uh, I'm going to demand a much higher price than I actually paid for it because I don't like to lose it, right? And that's because my attention is focused on what I might have to give up, rather than what I might gain. Okay, and so once we understand that, we can overcome it, right, by highlighting the good things rather than the bad things. So now I am really fully treading into some of the business applications, but if you were a financial services company, for example, which what we work with several like Vanguard, and that's where some of this research started, and you want to help a client with their consent to be a better judge and make better decisions over risky assets, you can present the information in a way so that it highlights the good things that might happen, the windfalls you might achieve, rather than the losses that might occur, right? And so that's one way in which you can use neuroscience to help shape decision making. That raises a lot of issues which we can talk about and which are top of mind for us, that that relate to the ethical, legal, and societal implications, right? Everything from consumer protection, privacy, and security to agency and autonomy. And that's a conversation that has to be had continuously. That's something that always needs to be considered. And I think that's another reason why, for example, why am I on this podcast? There's a lot of reasons, but one is to just raise awareness of what we know, right? And to some degree, what we don't know, so that everybody can participate in this value construction, right? So that everybody has a say in the way that neuroscience can be deployed, because it's powerful, right? And it can be deployed for good, in ways that help people to make better healthcare decisions for themselves, for example, by creating better, more effective messaging. But it can also be used for evil, right? And it can be used to shape political opinion, right, and other things. So we need to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, human brains work both the ways, good and bad. So of course, anyone can take the principles and they can just do the good things. They can do the bad things as well. So yes, it depends on, the human to human, brain to brain. Absolutely. So stepping on onto the business and leadership side, Dr. Platt, in business, relationships are everything. How can neuroscience help leaders create stronger connections with their teams and customers?
It's a great question. It's one that's been the focus of my own work for a long time. And my mantra, if you will, is that leaders should lead with the social brain in mind. That social connection is so powerful that it can be in the service of good business outcomes, but it also can, where you fail to attend to it, can really impair the function of your business. And so, good leaders, it turns out, have, I believe, and that's what I demonstrate in the book, good leaders have good social and emotional skills, high EQ, if you will, right? So they are good at modeling good behavior, right? Have, everything from actually attending to the people who they lead, but also creating cultures and conditions that promote social connection. Those social connections are critical for the way that teams function, right? So that they communicate better and more effectively. They collaborate and cooperate at a higher level. They can execute at a higher level. And actually, we've just shown in a recent paper that teams that have better chemistry, that are really in sync with each other, quite literally, do a better job of making decisions and actually don't get into groupthink because because they have a high degree of psychological safety, for example, that allows them to consider a problem from multiple angles. So these are just some of the ways in which leaders can really avail themselves of what we understand from neuroscience to give the people in their organization, in their firm, the tools and the space and the time to build and sustain the connections that we believe are so important for performance for all the reasons that I just discussed, but also so important for their own mental health and well-being. And employers are increasingly being asked to support, provide financial and other support for mental health in the workplace. And
Mhm.
you could kind of get ahead of that. I don't want to say for free, but close to for free, by developing and creating a workplace culture that promotes connection. Those connections are critical to how people work together, but that's a critical component of how they feel about the job, how they feel about their coworkers, which will manifest in whether they show up for work or not, how many days do they take off, will show up in retention, right? So
Mhm.
employees who feel stronger connection not only to the business but to their coworkers, right? That's a big source of the value we get out of a job. Frankly, it's not just money. Uh, they're going to be less likely the turnover is going to be a lot lower. Okay, and so these are just some of the ways I think in which leaders should really be focused on the social brain, which is one of those tools in our Swiss Army knives in our heads that's really so powerfully enmeshed in our lives.
Taking it further, Dr. Platt, that mirror neurons, I was just searching something. There's a new thing for me. Mirror neurons and empathy. These are the hot topics in this, professional networking industry, not networking, but the professional landscape from the behavioral science context. So if you can just help us understand how mirror neurons and empathizing the connection between those, we can help in the business and leadership landscape from those background.
Sure. So mirror neurons were really first discovered and described more than 30 years ago, actually first in monkeys before ever in humans. And the first mirror neurons that were described
Okay.
are ones that are involved in, like, if a monkey reaches out to grab something, a piece of food, these neurons would respond. And also if it saw somebody else reach out to grab the same thing, the same object. And so the idea is it represents what I do, my intentions, but also your intentions. And so that kind of led to this, and it was a bit of a leap. Oh, it's these neurons must be involved in empathy because it has something to do with not just what I'm doing or seeing, but it's the connection between my intentions and your intentions, which is some component of empathy, understanding your goals, right? Now, over the years, over the decades, and some of this work was done in my lab, we discovered that there are other quote unquote mirror neurons for different kinds of shared experiences. So there are mirror neurons for attention, we showed that. Like if I look that way or you look that way, when our behavior tends to be yoked, when our attention is yoked, this joint attention, just so critical for empathy and understanding and perspective taking in people, right? We see mirror neurons for that. We also describe mirror neurons for reward. A neuron that would respond to, getting a sweet treat yourself or giving it to somebody else, right? And I think you can begin to see that for social animals, in particular for humans, where so much of our own behavior and the decisions that we make is guided by a modeling, guided by an understanding, if you will, of the way somebody else, their emotional state and their mental state, right? Those two things come together. What are they feeling? And what do they want? What do they know? What are their goals? And then those kind of come together to shape what we do next, right? Do we approach them? Do we avoid them? Do we help them? Do we interfere with them? Do we negotiate fairly and cooperate, or do we cheat? Okay. And so I think that you can see that this sort of mirroring component is key to your brain's ability to develop a sophisticated model that incorporates all of that information to guide a sophisticated response. And in fact, we have, in a number of different studies, turned off some of those processes. And when you do that, for example, in an animal, it's harder to do in a person, they become less sophisticated, right? They become more stimulus response rather than taking into account some estimate of what somebody else might be feeling or what somebody else might know, want, or think is important.
And that what makes us human as emotional. I mean, in terms of understanding the emotions of different creatures, be it animals or humans. Am I right to say that, Dr. Platt? Just because of mirror
Well, I
neurons
think,
that make us sort of
yeah.
empathize or have a perspective of different human beings or creatures.
Yeah, so the places in the brain that we know are important for empathy in humans also seem to be important for empathy in other animals, monkeys, rats, mice, etc. And that's where you tend to find mirror neurons for emotional experience. So, if I'm having a good feeling, and what's the source of that? Or you're having a good feeling. And that kind of co-response, and we don't understand the mechanisms through which that actually ultimately translates into behavior, but that shared, if you will, shared emotional experience is a motivational signal, right? That can move us toward what we call other regarding behaviors, right? That could be pro-social, for example, helping someone, giving to a charity, collaborating, cooperating, negotiating fairly, all of those, really good things, rather than either ignoring the other individual or, doing the opposite, not helping them, or hurting them or uh, cheating them out of something, right? So I think that's sort of that is a major component, that emotional resonance between
Okay.
individuals.
So, I mean, mirror neurons, I think, if we speak in terms of neuroscience, that what makes us humans. If we take, for example, if we take mirror neurons out of the human body, will be just machine, if may I say so? Will be just machine because
Just a machine.
right.
I mean, we'll be more sophisticated than but I mean, we are machines, really. But we're a very sophisticated, special kind of machine. Uh, that hasn't been done in humans, but it's been done in animals, right? And so if you turn off those mirror neurons or turn off the parts of the brain that have them in them, then you've kind of shut off that channel, shut off the information from the other, and it makes you more
Oh,
egocentric, more, more, less. Well, you're just not incorporating the other individual's experience, the other individual's mental and emotional state into your calculations about what to do next, right? Like, even let's just put aside the subjective feelings and subjective awareness of that. uh, you're just losing that signal, right, which would help to inform your behavior so that it
Hmm.
incorporates what somebody else, somebody else's experience, somebody else's mental and emotional state. If you want to exist in a society, especially one where we
Hmm.
have where individuals are long lived and they have repeated interactions with each other, that is relationships, then it's critical to have those signals. Right. If you didn't have them, you would be more like a billiard ball, with a billiard ball that learns from experience, but doesn't really doesn't is not so good at making predictions. And those predictions, I think, are what's so important for making really good decisions, and decisions that can have long-lasting impact. Not just what's happening in the here and now. I mean, I have a really good example of that, which is from a paper we published in Nature earlier this year, where we recorded neurons in the brain in a couple of different brain areas in monkeys who were engaging in natural behavior. And one of the things that monkeys do the most, that they spend the most time doing, is building and nurturing a relationship by grooming each other. Okay? And that's like us going in and getting coffee or beer with a friend, that's sort of building and sustaining that relationship. And we've known for a long time that monkeys seem to be pretty equitable. Like if I groom you, then you groom me. And that the
Hmm.
more we groom each other, that's an investment in a longer term relationship. You'll come and help me if I need help later in the future. Okay. So what we discovered in this study, it's a whole bunch of different, there are a lot of discoveries in this study. We found that, and we measured every single interaction between pairs of monkeys over months.
Hmm.
And what we found is they reached equality, pure equity, in how much they invested versus received in grooming. Sometimes that was within minutes or hours, but sometimes it took weeks to get balance. Okay. And they did it. And remarkably, the brain tracked that. So we had a neural signal that was like a ledger or an account of investments and withdrawals in that relationship. Now, we've all
Hmm.
had that experience subjectively. Like when I don't know about you, but it's like if I've texted a certain friend three, four, five times, or I've had them over for dinner two or three times, and they haven't reciprocated, you start to feel really bad, and you start to feel like, oh, maybe I'm not going to text them now, and it's hard, right? You want to say, hey, what's up with you? Why are you not getting back to me? I think that's that sense that ledger has been, that they're in debt to you and they have
Hmm.
to pay you back. But it's purely social, right?
Reciprocation, I
Yeah,
think.
it's
Yeah.
reciprocity. It's
Yeah.
reciprocity and equity, right? And I think, we are so, now when you think about that we are so attuned to inequity. And we know that people tend to make decisions that in which they reject unequal outcomes. But society-wide, we are enmeshed in societies, across the world where there's a lot of inequity, where there's a lot of inequality. And our brains are really
Hmm.
attentive to that, right? And I think that you're building up this signal. That's one thing that might be going on, that, hey, you know, you're in debt to me. I'm on the losing end of this stick, right? And that has a lot of ramifications potentially. I don't know to what degree that contributes to, the physical, mental health, and brain health uh, impacts of inequality. I mean, some of that is through stress, and some of that is through, but where is that stress coming from? Some of that is like this, probably your brain, this warning signal saying, hey, you know, I'm on the losing end here. Where's my share? Just even the social relationship. Anyway, that's a little speculative, but what we discovered in the brain is not. I mean, it's a ledger, it's an account of equality in a relationship.
Okay. Hmm. Fair enough. That's quite a perspective to understand. So, moving on to the neuroscience in luxury and branding, Dr. Platt, want to ask what happens in our brain when we see luxurious products or services. How do we buy luxury? What just goes into our brain when we see luxury without naming the brands? So you know what brands sort of these days we hear when we say luxuries, be it in fashion, cosmetics, cars, or we take any industry, and of course, there's some luxurious brands in each industries. So what happens in the brain? Because just to give you the context, that luxury is something that is not needed; it's a want. For example, if there's a jeans or any clothes that someone wants to buy, so that's not the need, the kind of price they pay for that luxurious clothes. It's not a need, it's a want. So what's there? Because as an alternative, some really uh, some good clothes are there, some good piece of whatever product they are wanting to buy, it's already there. So why they buy that so high price product for the brand? So just want to understand what's happening in the brain when you see luxurious product
Yeah,
and why they buy it.
yeah. I mean, it's a complicated question. I would say we don't it's we don't know a lot yet. I mean, one reason why is that the vast majority of neuroscience research is done and funded to try to understand how the brain works at a basic level and how it falls apart in disease or following injury, and to develop therapies and therapeutics. And that of course, that's what we should do. So there have been fewer studies that are purely about some of these questions related to brands and marketing, but they're really important because they do affect our lives. They affect our finances, and they affect how we feel about ourselves and what we signal to other
Mhm.
people. So I can piece together a couple of things here. One is that there's definitely a signal quality to it, right? By buying luxury brands, you are communicating to other people that you have the wherewithal to do so, that you're kind of part of an exclusive club or community, and I'll get to that question in a moment. And it reflects, in a sense, the competitive nature of society. And my good friend and colleague Gideon Nave has done some really interesting work on luxury brand purchases and desires in men, in biological men, and shown that if you in really high-powered studies using a double-blind, placebo-controlled, so that the state, the sort of gold standard for treatment-based research, if you when somebody's treated with testosterone, this increases their desire for high status goods, for luxury goods.
Mhm.
And presumably that's because they're trying to, not trying, but the brain is then overvaluing the signaling quality in sort of a competitive landscape, right? And in general, if we look back over the course of evolution, if we look back, if we do comparative studies in non-human primates and in non-human animals, that in general, males sort of compete through displays, right? You can look at various kinds of birds with like peacocks, male peacocks, for example, displaying to show who's got the bigger, more diverse plumage, and they tend to win out in territorial battles and in the quest for mating opportunities. And you see that in a whole variety of different animals. So that's really interesting and sort of consistent with this idea of status signaling. We as humans, as primates, are driven by status seeking. Like there is just hierarchy, right? And that those status differentials are meaningful in terms of who wants to hang out with you, who wants to be like you, who wants to choose you as a potential mate or partner. I think we're fooling ourselves if we don't think that is important. And I spent half my life studying monkeys. You see it very powerfully there. So that's one component. The branding part, I think, is super interesting, and we've done a number of studies that have shown a few things that from both the behavioral level and the brain level. One is that celebrity endorsement by either powerful or sexy others, uh, boosts brand value. And this does so even in monkeys, believe it or not. Okay, so monkeys have status and monkeys have kind of attractiveness to each other. And you can even run an advertising campaign to monkeys that's based on solely on showing pictures of celebrity monkeys and non-celebrity monkeys next to human brand logos that we use every day. Like Domino's Pizza versus Pizza Hut, and then they come to want and will choose the brand logo that's associated with the celebrity endorser. And we see the exact same thing in people, right? It turns up the value of a good or a brand that you might be considering because our brains are wired to pay attention to this, right? They really care. So that's one component. The second relates to what a brand can deliver in terms of connection and community. Okay, and I think it relates to the status good as well. So we've done about a dozen studies now comparing Apple iPhone users and Samsung Galaxy users. And Apple iPhones, it's a much higher priced phone, but it's
Mhm.
basically the same piece of equipment, right?
Mhm.
Apple people pay for it. The brand loyalty is extremely high compared to Samsung or other brands, and now young people are overwhelmingly choosing iPhones. Uh, what we found is that Apple people like develop a strong social and emotional bond with Apple as a company, as a brand, okay, that shows up in their brains and also with each other, with the whole brand community. And in fact, their brains process information about the world, they see and feel about the world in very similar ways. Okay, they're like a big family. And the Samsung brains of Samsung users are not like that at all. They don't show any social emotional attachment to Samsung as a brand, nor to the other people who actually, who are owners of that brand. Rather, it's a tool. That's it.
It's a tool.
Like their brains
Yeah.
process that brand and that phone as a tool that can be used for, to do things. But
Thanks.
it doesn't capitalize on, it doesn't uh, get that hook, right? Now, I've been talking a lot about our social brains. We're wired for this. And so Apple's done this really wonderful thing, right? They've done this amazing thing, which is to identify this market segment that wants to connect and wants to be part of a community. And they've put that on steroids through their messaging, through the operating system, through the Apple Store, where it's an environment you can be with other Apple lovers, and all the people who work there wearing the same uniform, so it's like this incredible omni-channel experience, and you just don't have that with Samsung. So that articulates a little bit with the luxury good thing, only in the sense that both of the stories that I told you, or the three stories I told you, right, about testosterone boosting interest in luxury goods,
Yeah.
celebrities and power adding value to a brand, and this sense of connection, they're all social,
Mhm.
right? They're all
Mhm.
social. So I think that
Yeah.
that's where the
Yeah,
luxury
it
good
makes
comes from.
sense. Absolutely.
So,
So in a way, there's a contradiction between, we say that, by and large, we say that human brain is a social brain. We want, our brain wants to be with other people. There's a tribe. We want to be with our tribe. But in the luxury context, we want not to be with the generals, or with the crowd. We just want to be something do different, which other people are not doing. So how do you sort of connect between those two things? Or I mean, how do you sort of, because these are two contradictions of from a human brain perspective.
well, I mean, it all gets back to status, I think. And
Yeah.
status is a major driver of how our brains see the world and the way that we navigate it, right? So
Mhm.
and let's go back to monkeys because it's easier. It's easier to talk about, but the internal biology, the social brain is exactly the same, right? And yeah, monkeys connect with each other, and as I talked about, they invest in the relationship by grooming. That's critical, but monkeys always want to groom up the hierarchy. Like
Mhm.
their choice of partner will always be somebody who's higher status, if possible, because that does a few things. It gets you better access to better resources, access to a more powerful network of individuals, right? And potentially improves your value on the biological marketplace in terms of mating opportunities. So it's a bit of an extrapolation to humans, but I think, and it's certainly more complex, but I think that a lot of those drivers are still sitting there in our heads, right? And, we try to tell ourselves that they're not there, but they're there.
Oh, it was wonderful to, have these insights from you, Dr. Platt. So at last, just want to understand what areas of neuroscience and behavioral science excite you most for the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, we're still doing a lot of really exciting work that you'll get to hear about in the coming year on
Hmm.
everything from brand strategy to marketing to the various
Yes.
aspects of sort of digital technology and AI. But for me, one of the things we're really focused on is what is something we call brain capital, which is it's determined by your brain health and your brain skills. That's your most vital economic asset as an individual, as a company, as a society. Uh, it's under threat from many different forces, right? Including economic forces, uncertainty, AI, automation, mental health issues, physical health issues. But we have the opportunity to build brain capital. Okay. And so we're working on that in terms of policy, especially
Mhm.
building brain capital in young people through investing in them, but also building brain capital in adults, especially through the getting companies to invest right in the brain capital of their workforces. And that's a combination of brain skills and brain health. And we're getting a lot more traction there, a lot more stated interest from business leaders. And we're working with a couple of major companies right now to demonstrate the value add
Mhm.
on that. And you'll actually see a really nice paper coming out soon from the McKinsey Health Institute, which
Okay.
quantifies that proposition going from corporate investment in brain health of the workforce, in the end, ultimately translating into business performance, business value.
Wow, I'm so looking forward to that. So at last, just want to understand where can listeners explore your work and how they can be stay updated with your insights, Dr. Platt.
Yeah, I'm out there all over the place. So you can go to the Wharton website. You can Google me. I've got a great lab website, the Wharton website. We have a lot of free material that's out
Mhm.
there. So on the application of neuroscience in business. And I'm also very active on social media. So especially in
Yes,
LinkedIn
ma'am.
and X, where I
Same. Yes.
talk multiple times a day about the latest and greatest at the intersection of neuroscience, business, and health and well-being.
Dr. Platt, it was an absolute pleasure and full of insights about neuroscience, branding, marketing, luxury, everyday life for curious minds. It was absolute pleasure to have you here on the show, Behavioral Science Podcast, Dr. Platt.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I so look forward to have you on the show at some point of time again very soon.
That would be great. It was a lot of the conversation was a lot of fun. Thank you, Deepankar.